And I have the honor of presenting you with Maureen Boren. She has been a member of the Delta, is a member of the Delta Kappa Gamma Theta Epsilon, an honorary Women's Educators Society, trustee of the Coachella Valley History Museum, docent at Palm Springs Art Museum, and more, committee member of Palm Desert Cultural Arts Committee, and commissioner of Riverside County Historical Commission. I have the honor of presenting her for our historic legacy interview at this time in 2022. Maureen, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes.
All right. So, where were your ancestors from, and where were you born, and how did you end up here in the Coachella Valley?
In the desert.
In the desert.
My mother's side of the family came from Sparta, Greece, and my father's side of the family came from Ireland. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, but we didn't stay there that long. We traveled down to Texas, and then eventually I went to Okinawa and lived in the Orient for a couple of years since my stepfather was in the Air Force. And then we migrated to California, which is where I've been for the majority of my life. And I lived in Riverside, went to school at UCR, got my degrees, started teaching in Moreno Valley, and then met a man who lived out in the desert, in Indio, actually. And that's how I got to Indio, and then to Palm Desert eventually, through marriage. And that was, about 51 years ago.
Where did you first live when you came here?
We actually lived in what was considered Greater Palm Desert, I guess you would say. Palm Desert wasn't a city yet, but we lived in little apartments called the Del Nido Apartments off of Washington and the Avenue of the States. The apartments are still actually there. It's amazing, they're still standing. But we lived in those little apartments along with a lot of other young people who had come to the desert to find work. Many of us were right out of college or had just taken our first job or two, and the county, Riverside County, was hiring a lot of people. They were expanding. Teachers were needed in the valley. So I got a job in the Coachella Valley Unified School District. Actually, it wasn't unified in those days. It was the Coachella School District where I started. And my husband worked for Riverside County Probation Department.
Tell me about your job, your first job. Where was it, and what grade was it? And
I started working just as an elementary teacher in a little school in Moreno Valley, and called Edgemont, which was right near the air base, March Air Force Base. And I had basically all Air Force kiddos in my class, and we laughingly said the class that you start out with in September is not the class you will have in June, because they were constantly in and out, being reassigned. So I worked there for 3 years. But then when I came to work at the Coachella School District, I worked down at Valley View, which was, at that time, a fairly new school for that little district, and none of the districts down there were unified. There were separate districts, one for Oasis, one for Mecca, one for Indio, one for Coachella. And so it was very small operations. In fact, all of the schools, there were like maybe 3 schools in Coachella. And I remember one of the things was that you would go into the cafeteria in the morning and you could smell fresh food being prepared, bread being baked, because they prepared all their food right on the site. And depending on which school you went to, you would have a different menu. So if you went out to Mecca, you might have duck tacos. If you went to Coachella, you would have barbecue, you know, something very different. Well, of course, all of our schools have centralized kitchen facilities with everything wrapped up in plastic, and nothing tastes very good. But that was the beauty of starting in a very small school district, and I had very enjoyable experiences there. I enjoyed my families. Many of them were farm labor, but many of them also came from the water district, which was the headquarters, and the housing was right close to Valley View School.
Where was Valley View School?
Valley View is right in Coachella. It's on Valley Road, actually. It's not downtown, but it's very close to downtown Coachella.
How long did you work there?
I worked at Valley View for a few years and then went back and got my special education credential from UCR. And in those days, there was no four-year university out here. There was no way that you could go farther in your education, so we had to commute to Riverside. So after work, myself and a couple of other teachers, we commuted to Riverside about 2 to 3 times a week, and sometimes on the weekend, to get our credentials. And then eventually, National University opened up a satellite campus here, and I was able to get my MA from National. But from once having my special ed credential, then I went to other schools in the Coachella Valley Unified School District, and by then we had collected all of the schools at the east end of that valley into one district. And I became what's known as a program specialist, which meant that I developed programs for handicapped children and trained teachers and staff. And from that, I became the interim director of special education for a short time. So my job really took me to all of the schools in the district, even all the way out to the Salton Sea, which we had one small school, still a school there, and we had one classroom for special ed students. So I enjoyed being able to get to know the whole district and the whole area of that part of the valley. Worked in migrant education for a while because, as you can imagine, that a large part of our population was migratory farm labor kids. So that was for about 23 years I worked in that district and enjoyed it very much. But I did transfer to what became Desert Sand School District, and as a program specialist and as a resource teacher, excuse me, and continued to work in special ed, and went to mainly the Palm Desert schools. So I worked at Washington, which used to be Washington Elementary, and now it's Washington Charter, Lincoln School, Palm Desert Middle, the high school, and Carter. And I worked basically in the area of autism. So all of the autism students who were spread out in various schools, I developed program and did staff training and worked with parents and things of that nature until I retired 9 years later. So I enjoyed my work as an educator very, very much. It brought me a variety of experiences, and I enjoyed working with students, staff, and parents.
Do you have a story that you can remember from that that's especially dear to you during that time, or a family that touched you?
Well, I do remember that, of course, when you work with a family of the autism, you start with the children when they're very, very young. and you just continue, working with them very closely with their parents, because their program usually continued at home once they left the classroom. We would have instructional aides that would go to the home and continue to do therapy with them. There was one little boy who he was an adorable child, but he was pretty involved, and his parents were so tenacious in wanting to help him. So I met with them repeatedly, and they worked with him and worked with him and worked with him, and he was eventually able to read, do some academics. He had pretty appropriate social skills, and I followed him throughout most of his life until he was in high school. And his father started a business just with him in mind. His father started a margarita machine business, and he would he would go to people's houses who were having parties, and so he trained his son how to run the machine and how to work the business. And this was the Petrozelli family. And it was wonderful to see what could happen with a child with that kind of family support, and to see him grow into a functioning young man, which I think he's probably holding a job somewhere now.
Mm-hmm. Are you in touch with any of the people from?
I occasionally run into people here in Palm Desert who still live in the area. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would recognize some of the kids, because a lot of the kids I worked with were in other parts of the valley, but I do remember there was one young boy named Johnny who, in my very first class at Valley View, his father was in the fire department. His mother was very active in our parent group, and he was a bit of a handful. And so I met with his parents quite frequently, but generally nice kid. And I was out in front of my house about 4 years ago on Old Prospector Trail, and I was in the driveway, and all of a sudden this truck comes by, and it's got all this pool equipment sticking out of the back, and it screeches to a halt. And this young man, fairly young, jumps out and he said, "Mrs. Boren, is that you?" And I knew immediately when I heard that voice. I said, "Johnny, is that you?" And it was, it's not always that you get to see a kid when they're grown up, but he had his own business, he was doing well, and it was amazing that he, first of all, he recognized me from that distance, and secondly, that he remembered me. So, those are the things that teachers love to hear, don't they?
You told me that the schools were different. How were the schools different in this, the East Valley as they were compared to the Palm Desert?
I think because the socioeconomic makeup is very different. The children at the time, now remember, I haven't been in a classroom in about 20 years, so many things could be very different. But as I recall, when I moved from one community to another community, what I noticed was the children that I had been working with were extremely respectful. If I had any problem with a kid, I just needed to pick up the phone and get a hold of mother, and I had no problem with that. The parents really took care. Now, things have changed because everybody has broken families wherever you are. And unfortunately, there are many children who don't have the support of two parents or even one parent. They're being raised by grandparents. So I know that's changed, but as I moved over to this end of the valley, of course, the kids were coming to school better prepared because They had the language under their belt. They had probably been around books and they had been read to, not all, but enough so that I could make progress with them much more quickly. It wasn't an uphill learning curve for these kids, and there's no reason in the world why they shouldn't excel. Absolutely none. Sometimes there would be parents that would be more demanding that I wasn't used to seeing where I was before. But for the most part, the parents were also pretty supportive. We had good parent organizations at Washington and at Lincoln. You know, in fact, they were the backbone of the schools, because it's hard to believe, but in the 80s, the schools in Palm Desert did not have a lot of extra federal funds because of the socioeconomic level of the residents. And so basically what they had was what the district allocated. Whereas the schools in the Indio area where I had been working and in the east end of the valley had quite a few Title I funds. They needed it because there was so much need for lots of extra support. But what occurred was that it depended on the parents to supply whatever wasn't available in the schools. And so we had no school libraries in those days. There was none. None at Washington, none at Lincoln, and of course Carter wasn't built then. Palm Desert Middle had no library, if you can imagine.
What were the years of that?
That was in the 80s.
Okay.
It was the late 70s and early 80s. And so the parents kind of banded together and decided they were going to start a library. So we did that at Washington and we did that at Lincoln, and we just, we relied on donations of money and books to start one wall of a library. And that's what they had. But of course, these children had the ability to have books in their home, but nevertheless, you don't do research from those kinds of books, and you needed books in the classroom for the teachers to use. So teachers are spending a great deal of their own money to supplement what they needed in the classroom. So as a result, we, myself and some other parents, when our kids transferred over to Lincoln, we went to the school board and said, there's no equal education in this school district. And we understand the monetary issue, but you need to equip these schools over here too. And so we were able to get some books and libraries started on a very small scale, but we had to fight for it. Also, there was no cafeteria at Lincoln. There was no auditorium. There was no central meeting place. The kids from Lincoln had to walk across the grass to Palm Desert Middle, or junior high as it was called, to have their lunch. And they ate outside, which they do now too. We have outdoor eating areas, but we also have nice auditoriums. And so they had to walk across the grass to eat and then walk back. Well, that took up all the playtime. So eat and walk is what you got to do at lunchtime. But it was interesting. And we also didn't have much in the way of playgrounds. In fact, Washington, being a very small property, it's probably the smallest square feet of the building and the whole lot of any school in Desert Sands. Well, look, it's squashed around all of the housing development. We decided that we needed a proper playground, and it was just deadpan dirt, and I think there might have been a metal swing set, and that was it. So the parents decided to raise their own money, hire a landscaper, and I believe Mr. Holt at that time, who was just starting out as an architect, helped us. We had we went to the city of Palm Desert, which by that time was a city, and we said, we need trees, we need grass, we need to have something that looks like a park at our school. There's no park on this side of Highway 111. And at that time, there weren't the wonderful parks that we have in Palm Desert now. The Civic Park wasn't there. So we need a park on this side of the highway. Won't you help us? Well, the city gave us $10,000 to plant trees. And some of those trees are still there today. And we had all kinds of spring festivals and things to raise money, and we did that quite a bit, plus donations from residents, interested parents, and we were able to put in a proper playground. The berms and things are, the shape of the playground is still there, although it has been upgraded very nicely over time. And there's been playing fields and other things developed, but that was the effort of parents. You know, it was enjoyable being a teacher and a parent at the same time, and seeing that we could make progress by coming together and advocating for our neighborhood. So that was a good experience when my kids were growing up.
Could you give an example of an event that you might have had there to raise money?
Well, at Lincoln School, we were raising money for the library and for materials in the classroom. And we had something called Frontier Fair. And I'm of a mind that everything that you're going to do needs to have an educational aspect to it. It can be fun, but it needs to be educational. So we went to the staff, and Mr. Taylor, Larry Taylor, was the principal at that time. And we said, we want to do this old-fashioned frontier celebration. And we know that the 4th and 5th graders are studying American history, and so this will feed right into the curriculum. So there was a teacher that taught square dancing, and then other teachers pulled out the literature books and were reading to the kids about frontier days. And of course, they were studying it in social studies. And the staff was wonderful. We converted the whole playground into an old-fashioned town, you might say, and everybody was encouraged to dress up in frontier clothes, and we went around and gave prizes to everybody that dressed up. We had fiddlers that came and guitar players, and we had square dancing going on, and then the kids would go into different classrooms and they would learn how to make log cabins, or they would churn butter. We had old-fashioned ice cream making. We made chili. We did a lot of things from scratch so that the kids could see how it all happened, and it was great fun. And we raised a good amount of money.
What year was that?
Oh my gosh, I don't remember. I have the pictures at home, but that's when my kids were at Lincoln School. I'm not quite sure. But those were the kind of events that we planned, so they always had some educational aspect to it.
Moving on to real estate, property. I will say property because real estate is like, I'll just say property. Maureen, you lived in this apartment, and then you found this property. So could you tell us about?
Well, we had decided that we wanted to invest in building our own home and owning a piece of property. We knew we were going to stay here. And we started looking around. We looked in La Quinta, in the Cove. We knew people who lived there, and we liked some aspects of that. You have to remember that in 1971, 70, there was a lot of wide open desert. I mean, a lot. And Palm Desert was just emerging, of course. But there were some very nice areas in the south part of Palm Desert, near the foothills, near the mountains. And we loved hiking, and we loved the desert in so many ways that we wanted an area that gave us some space. We didn't want to be crowded into a gated community. Well, we couldn't afford one anyway. And we wanted our own spot. So we had a good friend, and he knew property. And he said, why don't you look over in the Palm Desert area? I want to show you an area that's being subdivided that used to be part of a larger ranch property, the Deep Canyon Ranch property. And there's some very large lots, and they're fairly reasonable. Well, in those days, $6,000 was reasonable. It seemed like a huge amount of money to us. But Mike showed us the land around Old Prospector Trail, which of course is still there, and some of the streets that were nearby. And he said, this has a beautiful view. It's got large plots of land. In fact, they're acres on this side of the block. And he says, you can't go wrong with this. So we looked at it, and we found the one that would sell. A lot of them were being held on to. And we were able to meet the price that they wanted, which was about $6,800, and it was all the money practically that we had saved. And I have a picture of that. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, or you may have to reproduce it, but here we are with the for sale sign. Does it show up? Mm-hmm. Okay, and you can see there's nothing around. The street behind us was Fairway, and you can't see in front of us, but that was where the mountains were. And we could walk all the way from our property all the way back to the mountain. And in those days, the Living Desert was called the Game Reserve. And it had just been established. They had like one building, and we could walk right in. There were no fences or anything. We walked our dogs all the way back there. So it was a very popular place for hiking, and it's on the alluvial fan. So we did purchase it, and when we started our family, one of our first Christmas cards was on the open desert in front of our property. There was a piece of a fence that was still there, and it said Old Prospector Trail, Deep Canyon Ranch property. And we thought, oh my gosh, this is so Western. So we made a Christmas picture out of it, and you can see the area that goes back to the mountains is all wide open. It was a beautiful, beautiful area. Smoke trees, all smoke trees, and Palo Verdes. Since it was purchased by the Vintage, and it is Indian Wells proper, so that runs in front of our street. There were very few houses. The Dengler house was down at the end of the street. Randall Henderson, who is the brother of the founder, Cliff Henderson of Palm Desert, his home was about catty corner from us on our same block. But that was it. And then our house. We started out looking for an architect, and we found Bob Rishardi. He had a little office on what they call Prickly Pear Square, right off of El Paseo now. He had a little office there. And Bob was doing some very big houses in Palm Springs, and also some public buildings. And we had seen a couple of his public buildings. He designed the first gas company building in Palm Springs, and we really liked the way he did it. We weren't into mid-century modern, but we were more into a ranch style home.
What did you like about?
Well, we liked that he put texture on the walls, and he just seemed to be very creative in his buildings. And so when we met him, we said, you know, we're just two working people. We think we have good credit. We'd like to build a home. We have a very large piece of property, and what can you do? Can you help us? And he said, he looked at us and he went out and he looked at the property and he said, well, this will probably be the last modest, he called modest, single family home that I ever designed. But he said, even ordinary people need to have well-designed homes. He said, that's my belief. And so he had another architect, Bernie Leung, in his office, and Bernie was given the responsibility of designing a house for us. And it's a very long, skinny house because it's not a very big house, but it had to fill up that acre. So he made a long, skinny house for us, which we are still living in to this day. And we've added taken out a few walls, added a few things, but it served us well. And it is a ranch style house. And then with this big piece of property, we said, boy, if we make a mistake by putting the wrong thing in the front yard, it'll look awful. We don't trust ourselves to do this. We need to find a landscape architect. Well, through word of mouth, we found a man who worked for the water district, actually. His name was Warren Noried, and on the side he did landscape architecture. And we consider him to be ahead of his time. In those days, when you drove through the desert, especially Palm Springs, you would either see white gravel on the front, or you would see grass. And that's what was the landscape, the grass. So we didn't want grass. We love the desert, and we wanted our property to be a reflection of where we live. We wanted it to fit in. And we told him we love to hike, we love the mountains, we love the plants here. So what he did was he designed all of our property around drought-resistant, sustainable plants that grew naturally here. So we have mesquites, we have fan palms, we have cactus, we have other flowering plants. And he also put berms, hills, all across the front of the property and the back. And they're bare berms, they're sand berms. And at that time, nobody put berms, everything was flat. Berms were unheard of. And rock outcroppings around the berms. He brought in volcanic rock and other types of things to make it look natural. And people would drive down our street and they'd say, okay, well, you've got those hills, so when are you putting the grass on them? And we said, well, we're not. They just could not believe it. And the way we got the hills was we scouted out, and every place we found that was digging a pool, we asked him if we could have the sand. And so then Warren would get a truck, he'd hire a truck and go over there and collect all the sand. And that's how we slowly got all of our berms.
What year was that?
That would be 1973, 74.
Mm-hmm.
So we built our house in 72.
Mm-hmm.
And we built it for a little over $30,000, which was a huge amount of money to us. Huge, huge. We thought, oh, you can build a house for $20,000 probably. Well, no. Anyhow, good investment. So he landscaped the front yard, and we had that one completed so it would look completed. And then we continued to work on the back yard over a long period of time because we didn't have enough money to really put all the plants in. We have over 100 trees on the property and hundreds of plants, each one having its individual bubbler, no spray water. So over time, we slowly added plants, and then we had to fence in the backyard eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't afford a block wall or a chain link fence or wooden fence. At that time, where Indian Wells is now, where the Vintage is now, and part of El Dorado Country Club was all grapes at one time. It's part of a ranch. And they were pulling out the grape stakes and developing it as the Vintage. And so my husband went over with our truck and he contacted whoever was pulling out the grape stakes. They were redwood, so they would last. And he asked if we could have them. They said, sure, we're just going to take them to the dump. So we probably got about 3,000 grape stakes. And because they're not long, they're about that high.
Mm-hmm.
And we had steak parties at our house. So all of our friends would come and we'd barbecue steaks. But the deal was they had to help us build the fence. So with 2 2x4s, we dug holes, put cement in, and then we laid the stakes across this way in panels because they weren't tall enough to make a fence. We must have laid those things for years. We did one wall, and then we started on the back, and then, it's an acre property, it's large. And our kids, eventually, they got marshaled in to help, and they had to pull water because we didn't have a water system back there. We just had the hose from the house. So we had to fill the holes with water, put cement in. It was quite a production. It took us a few years to get a fence all the way around the property. And it was very unique, rustic, you might say. Grape stake fence. So that's how we started.
Is it still there?
We had to take the grape stakes down. We still have some segments in memory of the old fence, but we have since replaced it with block walls because we got neighbors. And so our neighbors were able to help us put proper block walls. After a while, those stakes would rearrange themselves and you have to constantly go back there and rebuild the fence over and over and over. Got kind of old after a while. And then we had our one claim to fame, the house directly across from us, which had been built in the 50s, and I don't even know who built it. We had a famous director who lived there, same director who did all of John Wayne's films. So
it was John Ford, is it?
The director was John Ford. He and his daughter lived in that house for quite a while. He was quite ill at that time. It was near the end of his life. But it was, we remember the day that he received a special Medal of Honor from the President of the United States, and all these FBI and everybody came in these big black cars, and John Wayne came, and they were presenting him with this award, and everybody was out in front watching to see what was going on, trying to be non-obtrusive, of course.
The year that was?
I don't remember the year. He died while he was living at the house, so he was there quite a while.
You mentioned that you used to take your family to the Shadow Mountain Club.
Oh yeah, right. Well, in the beginning, COD was there, but we had no public swimming pool. And of course, kids needed to learn how to swim. So the rec department made a deal with Shadow Mountain Country Club that in the summer, they would hold swimming lessons at the big figure-8 pool. Well, the mothers loved it. You know, we loved going to that pool, and the kids could have their lesson and we could sit on the sideline under the umbrella and enjoy the ambiance of the beautiful Shadow Mountain Country Club. So that's where our kids learned how to swim.
Did they have a little place to get something to eat?
They did. They did. You could get cold drinks and sandwiches and things. So it was quite a nice outing.
It was busy there?
Not very. Everybody left in the summer. It was not unusual to have every business just about shuttered. Businesses closed up. And if you wanted to shop, you had to go to Riverside. When we first moved into the desert, all of the retail and shopping was in downtown Indio. That's where the Sears, that's where the clothesline, that's where the shoe stores, the pharmacy, Johnson's Photo, Yellow Mart, all of the places where you could actually do shopping, not tourist type shopping. You had to go downtown to Indio. And then we did a lot of buying through the catalog, the Sears catalog, of course. But even Palm Springs didn't have the kind of stores that families could shop in. There were no Walmarts or Targets or anything like that. So you went to Indio or you went out of the area to shop, or you made your own.
What about grocery store?
Oh yeah, there were grocery stores. Let's see, I'm trying to think where. Stater Brothers, trying to think the grocery stores that we shopped at. Albertsons has been here a while, but I can't honestly remember. I think there was a Vons. There were several grocery stores in Indio, large grocery stores that we could go to. And then when we lived over in the small apartments, there was a Welty's Market, and that was had a great meat counter, and locals used to go there. And then there was another small market here in Palm Desert. It wasn't a large chain. I cannot remember. It was on the north side of the freeway. But there wasn't much in Palm Desert. We did have an A&W, and it was a wonderful A&W. And a man named Bud owned it, and everybody liked Bud and his wife. It was the cleanest, most spick and span. He always kept it painted to an inch of its life, and you could always go in and get a cold mug of root beer. But unfortunately, when the lease ran out on the property, the city in those days, in their infinite wisdom, decided that there were not going to be any fast food restaurants in Palm Desert. No. So they wouldn't let him renew the lease. And so Bud left, and we were so sorry about that. And there weren't any fast food restaurants for a very, very long time. And when the first one went in, we all said, aha, they should have left the A&W alone.
Were there restaurants on El Paseo then?
No, there were no restaurants in El Paseo. There was the Iron Gate, which was on Highway 74, just a little bit up from 111. There was Meat, Fish, and Liquor Company, it was called, on 111, which was very popular. It had an old boat out in front. You went to Palm Springs if you went to a restaurant, or you went to Indio. But there weren't many. Keaty's, of course, Fountain has been here a long time. But in terms of restaurants, no, not much. You went to Rancho Mirage, and at that time, there was Restaurant Row in Rancho Mirage. But you went to Palm Springs if you wanted to eat out.
The mall.
Oh, that was a big deal. When the mall came in, oh my gosh,
What year was that? 80s?
I don't remember,
Okay.
but it was a big deal. And in the mall, they not only had a movie theater, but they had an ice skating rink down at the bottom near the theater. And that was a great thing because in the summer, you know, we could always go to the ice skating rink and get cooled off. And many birthday parties at the ice skating rink, and it was really unique. Which is, I think, Han, who started that mall, H-A-H-N, he wanted something very different, you know.
Was
had
he a local
vision.
person?
Han, no, he's a developer that,
Okay.
well, he did have holdings here, but I'm sure he had holdings elsewhere too. Ernie Han, he was the brainchild of the first mall.
What stores were in the mall to begin with?
Well, Sears, May Company. There were a lot of individually owned shops in there, very unique shops owned, not the chains that you see, but that's probably true of a lot of places. I think See's Candy has always been there. Penny's was there, but a lot of individual shops, so you could always get unique things there. It was decorators, shops, clothing stores, shoe stores. It was really a one-stop shopping place.
Did some of those shops migrate out to El Paseo, or how did El Paseo come to be the quote-unquote high-end shopping area?
You know, I'm not party to how that developed, but I do know that it evolved slowly from the Portola end. That's the oldest part, of course. And the bank is where Mitch's is now. That was our bank. And there were just a few like hair salons and I would say clothing stores, but some businesses down at this end, as I say, we call it Prickly Pear Square.
Mm-hmm.
And how the other part developed, it would have to be whoever owned that property and had the vision for what could become that street. I know there was always a median down the center, and we had some real crazy things that we used that street for, like the golf cart parade started a long time ago.
Before, was that during your time? Or?
Oh yeah, we remember. And I think at one time it actually occurred in July. It was like crazy. It was like something to do in July. Yeah, it's always been like our one kind of downtown area where things are compact.
What are some of the most rewarding things about being here in the Coachella Valley?
Oh, well, we think we made the right decision in the beginning. We love the beauty of the desert. We love the openness and the peacefulness. We love where we are, where we're able to live. We feel that, yes, there's been a lot of progress, but the amenities that have come in to our city, I think, are wonderful, and I think there has been a lot of well thought out plans for families, not just visitors. We have beautiful parks, we have recreation facilities, we have culture, we have education. Wonderful having the four-year college here and the community college. That's fabulous. It's a place that a lot of people love to visit and wish they could live in. So what's bad about that?
So what is something about the desert that would surprise people?
I think they don't realize the inherent beauty of the desert, especially if they have expectations of coming from back east or Washington, where it's very green and seemingly lush. I think people have to see it at different times of the year to understand its own beauty, the beauty of the Southwest, the opportunity we have here to be in a mountain environment as well as a desert environment within just minutes. And I think also people don't realize the diversity of our population. Certainly there were diverse pioneers that came into this valley at the turn of the century, looking for places to start farms and to start families. Land was inexpensive. We have a large contingent of Armenian families, Japanese families, certainly Mexican-American families, Black families, Filipino, and many of these cultures centered around agriculture, but not all. And now it's seen as an area of opportunity for entrepreneurs. We have East Indians. We have quite a diverse group of people living here. If you look at the different churches that we have, just in Palm Desert alone, we have a Greek Orthodox church, we have Armenian church, we have Jewish synagogues, Catholic churches. All of these reflect the people who live here. And these are the people that are making a living here, that are making history. We weren't all developed by movie stars, and there was a huge contingent of the movie industry people here, and they love coming out and being away from LA and Hollywood, and we certainly enjoy all of the stories we hear and all of the things that occurred because of that. But that's not the only thing that developed the desert. And I think that might be surprising to people. They get an idea that, oh, we just have music festivals for 50,000 people, and we have only mid-century modern architecture. We have such varied architecture in this valley. I mean, everywhere. You can see Spanish Revival, you can see mid-century, you can see Western, you can see Pueblo-style houses, you name it, we've got it. And we have art. And that is the wonderful thing about the city of Palm Desert, is the commitment to public art. Got to get that in. Throughout our city, pieces of art have been placed. Down the median on El Paseo, we have a large sculpture exhibit that changes every 2 years. Throughout our parks and our public areas, you'll see art representing different types of art. And I think it's part of the fabric of the city to represent art and beautiful things around us. Now we're developing San Pablo, and it has all kinds of possibilities for interactive art and art of the people, you might say. So something around every corner.
It's been an honor to get to know you better.
Well, thank you, Leslie.
And talk to you, and thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.